They worked with the most blatantly racist coworker of ours to convince other white workers that it is not in their best interest to form a union.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
All right, so next up I have Isaiah Thomas. He is an organizer with the Bessemer, Alabama Amazon union effort with the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Isaiah, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So you are going to be on a panel on Saturday about race and labor and how we can talk about that, how racism affects our organizing, how it affects our day-to-day relationships, and just the whole thing, because racism is a very big part of our society, and so it's gonna come up. It's gonna come up in our organizing. It's gonna come up in our unions, in our leadership, in our membership, and so how do we address it? That's what the panel's about. And so, just starting off, we can just start off with addressing it in the context of an organizing campaign. If you're trying to form a union in a workplace, what are some of the ways that racism might show up in that context, and how can a union activist and a workplace committee fight against that?
So the first and obvious way of how racism pops up in an organizing effort is through the techniques that the bosses use to actually prevent us from actually forming our union. I've seen it with my own eyes at Amazon. They hired these consultants, which worked with the most blatantly racist coworker of ours. I mean, straight up neo-Nazi, to convince other white workers that it is not in their best interest to form a union, and that the union is nothing but, an outside group coming in to disrupt what you already have. And so having to talk to your coworkers to realize what the company is doing purposefully to try to prevent any kind of solidarity and any kind of momentum inside the facility to form to bring about real fundamental positive changes. It goes to show how power dynamics also play within race. And then when you're talking with your coworkers there are some of my coworkers who are blatantly racist, such as the one who was used as a pawn by the company. And how do you address that, especially when having organizing conversations with them, trying to, get them on board with wanting to form a union, why it's important to form a union? It's 9 times out of 10, race is going to come up because there's some folks who are like, well, this, let's say, immigrant per se, even though they don't even know if they're an immigrant or not, they'll just assume. And you have to catch that. And I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. It's going to be an easy conversation. It's going to be tough. It's going to be uncomfortable because you're talking with somebody who actually doesn't view another person as equal, or maybe they're just ignorance is a real thing. And how do you overcome ignorance is by talking to people to get them to realize that that other person over there who may look different than you is nowhere near different than you, because they have to pay bills, they have to take care of their kids, and they have to show up to work too. There's nothing that's different between us, only other than, the fact that the company is trying to push these differences between us and whatever other outside examples that come in to actually want to actually prevent us from coming together. And so in the context, to put it in the context of actually winning and addressing it in the organizing committee, using it as a method to teach one another of how to address the race issue and racism inside the workplace. you have to have folks educated on approach. Like, you have to approach people in a way to where they don't think that you're trying to start a fight. Because there are some of my coworkers who, when you're like, "Hey man, that's racist," like someone says something that's blatantly racist, and you're like, "Man, that's racist." Some people take it, like they get very defensive about it, and it's like, well, what you said is wrong, and we need to rectify this because you're actually hurting other folks, and you're preventing us from coming together as a union to do something that would benefit all of us. And at the same time, when you have the company instigating it, it's another challenge you have to get around, because it's the power dynamic that comes with it. And so not only are you overcoming a social ill such as racism, but you're overcoming the power dynamic that's tied with it. And it makes me think of, there's a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois about the psychological wage of whiteness, which is where white workers, and he was talking about in the terms of the South, white workers have sacrificed solidarity for this idea of having a social authority over other workers and other people who are in the same ladder as them, rungs of the ladder of the social hierarchy. They could be poor white folks and they're poor black folks, but because the ruling elite have such power in the context of the South, but all over the United States, but in the context of the South, they use that power, whether through the media or through the workplace, to actually prevent workers from coming together, and they use the color of their skin to make that justification.
Right. Now, I remember reading that and thinking that was, thinking that was pretty profound, and a really good explanation of why why bosses will try to use that so often, and even beyond the race issue, but just thinking about a psychological wage that maybe you get instead of a real wage. We hear about I know of several workplaces where if you're promoted into management, you actually make less than the union workers. And so why, just on a practical, if you're thinking about it from a rational, self-interested, free market weirdo, right? Why would you ever want to be promoted, quote unquote?
Right.
And it's because you get this psychological wage of being a manager, of being a boss, of being in charge of other people. And there's a similar thing happening there with racism. As long as I can be, even if I'm not, if I can't point to any material ways in which I'm better or my life is made better by castigating this other group of people, I can feel like I'm better. Right. And that's something that's pretty difficult to fight against if people are really dedicated to getting this psychological wage.
Right. And like, the approach, not only is the problem intersectional, the approach also has to be intersectional as well. Because I know that there are some folks, especially people with the same politics as me, they can be class reductionists, but we have to take it further, because all of these things play in part together, and they work together. And so how is it that we can get folks to overcome that psychological wage of whiteness, right? Is by honestly, it's by, exposure to the fact that your other coworkers are going through the same things that you're going through. And I like how you mentioned how if they get like a managerial position and they don't get paid as much as union workers, it's an example of like the Stanford prison experiment. It's an obstacle that we have to learn of how to actually get that shit out of the way, because it's hindering us from performing any kind of collective action that would be that is for the better of all of us. And the only way that we can actually get rid of it is through praxis, through talking with our coworkers, actually confronting it where it is, instead of pushing it to the side or ignoring it. And we have to have those uncomfortable conversations with them.
How receptive have people been? You know, you mentioned that this is not an easy conversation, but you know, I think that you have, even though you're younger than I am, I think that because of the nature of the organizing work that you've done, you've actually had the opportunity to have more of these conversations with people. And how receptive have folks been in your experience to, you know, that correction, when, you know, when they do a racism, right? And you're like, hey, you know, you like you did a racism a little bit there. You know, how have those conversations gone usually?
It has been, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's like, oh, everybody's like, oh, you know, I realized I just did racism.
Right. Oh, you just undid 30 years of learning. From,
right.
You know, like,
right.
Well, I'm not a racist anymore. Right.
It's a working progress. Like there are, so to give context, the facility I work at, the Bessemer facility, is 85% Black, and the rest of the percentage is white folks. And how I approach the situation, also due to the fact that, so I'm mixed. So people can't tell that I'm biracial, that I'm, you know, Black and white. And so some of my coworkers who are Black, they're uncomfortable talking with some white coworkers who say some racist stuff. Right. And so that's where I feel like I have to step in and be like, okay, let me have these conversations. And when I have these conversations, they're, like I said before, it's a constant effort of trying to get them to realize that what they're saying is harmful and that it's actually preventing us from forming our union. And it's crucial that you have more than one person talk to this person, because I alone sometimes may not be the person to change that person's mind. Sometimes it has to be somebody else. And so when you're organizing, you identify who the leaders are and who they pull. Sometimes the person that you're talking to who is racist or does a lot of dog whistles, for example, they actually may be a follower of a leader inside the shop who, let's say, is not, you know, who doesn't condone this stuff, but the person who says the dog whistles look up to this leader, right? If you find out who that leader is, who can actually talk to this person, then that's another option of trying to get them to overcome that bigotry, but also solidarity on the work floor, and them seeing that we're coming together and we're actually bringing about positive changes that's also impacting their life. Maybe that can also help them overcome their prejudices, because they're seeing, okay, these other folks, which are multiracial and they're multi-generational, and they're coming together and they're bringing about positive benefits that I see impacting my life. Maybe I was wrong. And so it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not just like one and done situation and one and done strategy. It's multiple strategies of trying to help people overcome whatever bigotries or prejudices that they may have.
And so, you know, moving into conversations about how, you know, from conversations about how racism affects our organizing to conversations about how racism can affect the structure of our unions and how we can hold, you know, leaders, quote unquote, accountable. Right. You know, there's been something happen recently with the Los Angeles labor federation. There were a couple city councilors. The president of the LA City Council was saying some. She did a racism. She did a big racism, right? And like, I mean, it was really, really ugly and disgusting. And it was said in the labor temple, in the house, literally in the House of Labor of Los Angeles, with the president of the LA Labor Federation there. And, you know, that is something that is so disappointing to see as somebody who is, you know, an officer of the Labor Council here in North Alabama. You know, the idea that somebody who's representing, you know, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or more union members, is allowing these conversations to take place in his presence inside of our house. It is just disgusting, and so he has resigned as Labor Federation president, and I'm not sure if he's resigning from his office in the Teamsters, but you know, this is something that this is not the first racist conversation that he's been a part of. You know, it can't have been.
Yes.
He's like 50, 60 years old. He's been in the movement a long time. You know, who knows how many people he has participated in conversations with, made racists feel comfortable in his presence and participated in that kind of thing. And, you know, how much damage has he done that we are not privy to? And so, you know, I guess just your thoughts on the situation and how we can foster a culture of, you know, holding our leaders accountable.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a good example of a replication of the social ills and the hierarchical society being replicated inside of, you know, the labor movement. And I think the best way that we can overcome that, to prevent that replication, because we live in a society, and I hate to say, because I know, you know, we live in a society, but we live in a society where it is hierarchical, and that actually produces racism, and that in order to keep those social controls in place, the ruling elite will use anything to actually prevent us from coming together and forming a labor movement that would actually bring about real change for everyone. And so in terms of what happened in LA, it's replicating, and how we prevent that from happening is by having a grassroots momentum of the membership. I mean, because the membership has to hold them accountable, and we have to rally those folks at the ground level to say that this is not okay and we're not going to accept this, and actually put forward a grassroots program of democratic accountability where we can actually remove these members easily, like one member, one vote. And there has to be like a recall of some of these it has to be easy to recall these representatives if they're this problematic. I mean, because being able to have that ability to hold power, and you're putting forth this garbage of racism and saying some stuff that's very uncomfortable, it shouldn't be allowed, especially with the fact that what we're creating here in the United States with the upsurge of the labor movement, we cannot allow that to continue.
Yep. Yeah. Totally agree. Is there anything else that you think is you know, important to pull out in this conversation about race and labor before we let you go?
Yeah. Folks, it's not going to be it's not going to be easy. When we talk about forming a union, when we talk about revitalizing the labor movement here in the United States, and when we talk about bringing forth the policies that we want to see to help out everyone, we also have to address the racism and the bigotry that still exists in our society. I'm very anti-capitalist and I'm very radical. And in order for us to, get rid of capitalism, in that strive to get rid of capitalism and to form a new society where there is no poverty and people actually do have a say in their workplaces, but also in their governments, we also have to look at the other intersectional issues that affect us, such as racism or sexism or any kind of xenophobia that prevents us from having any kind of unity and solidarity, because it's important for us to have unity and solidarity to bring about the things that we really care about, that we want to see changed. And so these conversations are not going to be easy. And in an organizing context, and when you've already have an established union context, always try your best to be involved in forming that grassroots movement, to have accountability and to have that process of showing unity and solidarity and talking to those coworkers who may have, bigoted viewpoints or prejudices.
Isaiah Thomas, worker at the Bessemer, Alabama Amazon facility, organizing a union with RWDSU. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.